We've received a great many questions lately about brother patterning and issues related to it. And really that's wonderful because it means people are restoring old machines. So in this movie, Jack is going to explain to you how it's working on the inside, and I'm going to show you how we make it happen as knitters. It's usually best to begin with a punch card already inserted and locked on the row that you want to start on. This is the locked position. If it looks a little funny to you, it's because this machine is missing a knob, but the lever is correctly positioned, and that doesn't really make any difference. Just before knitting the row before the first patterning row, we want to turn the carriage setting to KC, but leave the card locked in this position. Even though the card is in place, as long as the dial on the carriage is set to N, there will not be any needle selection. As soon as you turn the dial to KC, needles will start selecting, but they won't pattern that row. They're selecting for the next row. After knitting one row on KC to set up the pattern, we move the lever into the second position. In this position, the card will advance every row. If we were to set the lever to the long triangle, it would advance every other row, which would double the length of the pattern. Each row on the card would be repeated twice before we moved on. Depending on whether we want to work Fair Isle, tuck, or slip stitch, we'll also engage buttons, but this movie is not really about which stitch, it's just about setting up for the selection and how the selection takes place. So I'm not going to engage any buttons. Having knitted the setup row, we move to the advance every row position, and as we knit, the machine will respond to the card and select whatever needles it is told to every row. Under the carriage and inside of the machine, a multitude of things are going on. Let's have a look.
All right, needle butt goes here, and it has no recourse but to be pressed down. And I'll show you if you wait 1 second. We've measured all these. They're 7 millimeters from the bed, but look at the distance there. There's very little. Here's my millimeter scale right here. And when the butt comes across here, it's not got 7 millimeters of distance. See, it gets pressed down when it comes across this area. And that's when the selector plates are going back and forth. And if the needle is pressed down right there, momentarily that selector plate catches it. But that's how come they end up in this configuration, is because they were momentarily held by the selector plate, which is told what to do by the holes or no holes in the card.
And we're looking at the rotation, and below are the things I call staples, but their correct name is
selector rods or selector pins. And what they're doing is they're being pushed by these cam drivers right here. Those cams push them as they go past them. That's the selector rods there. And yeah, staples because they're U-shaped. Some are in the back and some are in the front. But as they go through, and I'll be the drive belt for just a second, you can see they get pushed to one side by those cam followers. You can see the needles being pushed. So,
not needles.
The selector rods.
Yeah.
So if the rod gets pushed to one side, that's corresponding to the selector plate that's underneath. When this goes down, we're changing direction. That goes down, look at what happens to your selector rods. They're being dropped down.
Okay.
Okay, this has a bar connected across the bottom, and it lets these drop down so that when the card advances and this pops back up, these selector rods come up. Where there's a hole, it comes up high. Where there's no hole, it doesn't come up at all. And that's what tells the selector rods, the plates that are underneath here, that go back and forth all the time. That's what tells them, oops, this needle butt needs to be caught, that one needs to be caught, that one, as it goes.
But the actual thing that will cause it to go down happens
right there. So if I'm a needle butt and I'm coming the other direction...
Many people have referred to you as a needle butt.
I know. And pin-headed too, but that doesn't matter here. Here we go. We're coming in. We're going across. We're coming down. We go through the center. We go through here. We go through here. We come down. And here we are again. The needle butt, once it flips out of here, has to go through here. And it's getting pressed down.
The selector plates are way down in here. And we're going to zoom in and slow the action way down so you can see them work. To help you identify what you're looking at, I've thought it over, and to me, the selector plates resemble a saw blade to some degree. And they're moving, and they're interacting with the needles. The selector plates have taken their information from the selector rods, aka staples, and now they are passing it on to the needles. The back end of each needle is pointing towards us in this view. So when we're in front of the machine and on top of it, we're seeing some needles come forward and some stay in normal working position. And this is where that is being determined.
These needles are going to go in right here. Those needles are going to come in behind them. We'll do the same thing again. They're being scooped either in front of this end of the scoops or right behind the scoops as we go through. But I will point out that this, where the dial is about the location of that depression cam that we looked at underneath. So all these needles that have gone in here in this direction aren't going to get pushed down until they get right here. So as they come out is when they were caught by the selector plates, because they were being pushed down and caught by the selector plate. We looked at the selector rods riding those cam riders. So when that selector rod comes back up, if there's a hole, then the selector plate's going to grab the needle butt as it goes by, and it's going to come out here. If it's not a hole, if it's a blank spot, then it's not going to catch it, and it's going to drop down and come out here. So if it comes in here, and it's selected when it comes across here, it comes back out right there. If it's not selected, then it drops down and comes out here. So if it comes in here, and it gets over to this spot, again, if it's selected, it'll come back out there, though it went in behind the scoops. If it's not selected, it drops down and comes out behind the scoops. So here, this is the spot where on either side, in either direction, this is the trailing edge of the carriage. If you started collecting needles here, this is the trailing edge, and this is the spot where the selector plates either grab the needle or don't, and hold it just long enough to let it come out here, or don't hold it at all, and it comes out there. So that is the function of how the needles swap places according to the patterning on the card. So the selector plate, when the needle butt gets here, either grabs it or doesn't. Grabs it, comes out here. Doesn't, comes out here. And so that's how your card is setting up your pattern for the next row as they come out of the carriage. What happens when you change direction, this is the KC spot now, and that lets the needle butts come here. But if you go to a different setting, the needle butts can't get to this spot to be grabbed or not grabbed, so they're all going to come out.
That's how come you get no patterning on end.
Exactly.
This is a complex series of events, so quite a number of things could be wrong if you're getting mispatterning. To help you with that, you're seeing some other movies we have scroll by.
Because what we just showed you is such an intricate, momentary situation, when we see mispatterning, one of the first things I check is timing. Timing is everything to where the needles end up when they come out of the carriage.
The timing belt is therefore the obvious thing to check, but sluggish flippers and lack of cleanliness in the area of the staples can also cause delays in timing and throw things off. We've organized all of our videos that cover aspects of this subject into these two playlists, and I will put links to the playlists in the program notes so that you can follow up and find your exact issue. We hope this gets some vintage knitting machines back to working happily.